Pearl Harbor's first secret weapon didn't sink a single ship. It delivered one shivering Japanese officer to one Hawaiian corporal and quietly predicted who would win the entire Pacific War. December 7th, 1941, before sunrise. Lieutenant Sakamaki wedges himself into a midget submarine that reeks of battery acid and oil. Tokyo's admirals have briefed him with confidence. American defenses are lazy, slow, porous. His mission is elegant. Slip into Pearl Harbor, undetected. Torpedo, something vital. Vanish into the Pacific as a ghost. The Type A submarine is Japan's hidden blade, nimble, silent, invisible. Then the ocean introduces itself. A wave lifts the bow and smashes it against a reef with a crack like splitting bone. The gyrocompass spins into garbage. Sakamaki grabs for the valve wheel as copper floods his mouth. Another impact shears his thoughts in half. Coral claws at the hull. Hours grind by in a metal tube the size of a hallway closet, the battery dying, the air turning thick and sour. The secret blade is now just a can being kicked by a very large ocean. He arms the scuttling charge. Darkness swallows him. Sakamaki wakes face down on a Hawaiian beach, surf in his ears, American boot prints beside his head. Above him, a rifle barrel. Holding it, Corporal David Akui, 28th Infantry, Hawaii National Guard. Akui's breath fogs once in the morning air. He has a clear shot. Sakamaki reaches for English and finds only the barest words. "I am cold," he says. Tokyo's ghost weapon has delivered one wet, exhausted officer to one corporal with sand on his knees. What Sakamaki doesn't know is that this is the real shape of the war he's just entered. Japan is betting on surprise, skill, and secret machines. The United States is about to answer with something else entirely. Factories that will build 300,000 aircraft before this is over. One every few minutes, every day, for years. In cities he's never seen and cannot imagine from this beach. You don't need to tour those factories to feel what those numbers do to a battlefield. You only need to see one man who thought he'd be a ghost, blinking up at a rifle. Corporal Akui looks down at the shivering man at his feet. He doesn't pull the trigger, he takes a prisoner. One incredibly expensive secret becomes a telegram. You can be defeated on day one, and the Americans will have the patience to make a spectacle of your technology. In Tokyo, Sakamaki's name will be struck from the records. In the United States, his submarine, HA-19, will travel the country on a war bond tour like a circus animal. Somewhere, a clerk stamps a paper telling Sakamaki's family he died. Somewhere else, a welder sparks another fuselage into being. "Tell me," Sakamaki asks later, his teeth still chattering, "what will happen to me?" The guard answers with a blanket first. Wool on his shoulders and the sound of trucks rolling past. February 19th, 1942, Melville Island, Northern Territory. The humidity presses down on the scrub. Darwin's sirens have already faded into memory and smoke. The first major raid on Australia has scattered across the top end, leaving rumours in its wake. In the scrub outside a Tiwi settlement, a Zero sits cooling, that beautiful, lethal aircraft with its own heat in cooling metal. The engine ticks. Inside it, pilot Hajime Toyoshima takes inventory of himself by touch. Blood tacky under the flight suit, a headset hanging around his neck. He was trained for the sky. The ground is foreign territory and he's bleeding. Matthias Ulungura moves through the scrub, the way it moves through itself, part of the landscape, reading broken twigs and disturbed earth. He steps out where Toyoshima can see him clearly, rests the wooden handle of his tomahawk against the pilot's back, and speaks English without refinement. "Stick 'em up." The pistol suddenly weighs too much. Hands rise. Toyoshima calculates fast, the way a good pilot does. He tries a name that isn't his. Tadao Minami, something invented. It buys him nothing. Walking through heat and buzzing flies to soldiers with notebooks and tape measures, he watches the Zero become something different. It becomes a textbook. Mechanics descend on that broken metal, like archaeologists on a tomb, cataloguing rivet spacing and control surfaces. The beautiful, impossible range that made the A-6M deadly across the Pacific came from weight saved everywhere it could be saved. No armor behind the pilot, no self-sealing tanks, or only compromised ones. Range at the cost of survivability. Agility at the cost of forgiveness. What made it dance in the sky also made it fragile. A mechanic wipes knuckles on a rag already blackened with oil. We learned more from that wreck than from pamphlets. The captured Zero doesn't feed headlines alone, it feeds classrooms. What's inside those wings becomes part of why American pilots stop dying at the same rate. It becomes the tactical doctrine that spreads pilot to pilot. Don't turn with it, dive away, hit and climb. Don't fight the plane it wants to be, make it fight the plane you're flying. By year's end and into the next, the United States deploys over 100 escort carriers. Thousands of pilots trained each year in a pipeline that swells like a river after heavy rain. One cockpit on its back in the scrub, one captured plane. Behind it, the promise of dozens of decks at sea bristling with aircraft that don't need to be the best if they simply keep coming. Toyoshima ends up behind wire in a camp, part of a mass of men in the heat. In 1944, at Kaura, he dies in a breakout. For now, he's a young pilot who guessed wrong with a name and found a hand on his back. "You, from where?" someone asks as they take his pistol. "Near the water," he answers, watching soldiers surround the wreck he thought would only be a flame on the horizon. The pilot was good. The aircraft was beautiful at what it did. A mechanic with a pencil helps send someone else home alive. The Zero's genius lived in its trade-offs. Early models are light because weight is the enemy of range, and range is the path to surprise and attack. Aluminum skin and tight joints, a radial engine sipping fuel at cruise, no armor behind the pilot, no self-sealing tanks, or only compromised ones. The result is a dancer in the sky, high lift, low wing loading, a wicked roll at lower speeds. But dive too fast, and the control surfaces stiffen. The plane doesn't forgive steep, negative G maneuvers. If your enemy stops waltzing and starts sprinting, a dive away, then a climb, and if he can shoot you once or twice with heavier guns that fire faster and hit harder, the dance ends. "I thought I could disappear into a new name," Toyoshima says to another prisoner that night. He smiles without warmth. Names don't matter when the wreck is talking. The wreck talks to sergeants and lieutenants who brief pilots who will survive. The invincible meets someone who isn't supposed to matter and loses. The system learns. June 4, 1942. The air over the Pacific is bright enough to lie. From a cockpit, the ocean looks like a sheet of hammered glass. For Kaname Harada, it's another mission. Fighters up, bombers armed, find the enemy, strike hard. The Zero has been a bully since winter. You don't think about fear when you have the better climb, the tighter turn, the longer reach. You think about the next tally scratched inside your skull. Down on the carriers, deck crews move with practice speed. They're the best in the world at this. Arming, refueling, spotting, launching with mechanical precision. Then orders ripple through. Change of target, change of plan, change again. Bombs off, torpedoes on, torpedoes off, bombs on. Excellence is tuned to a plan. When the plan twitches, it becomes effort, then sweat, then hazard. Ordnance carts clatter. Fuses come off and on like bad jewellery. A sailor runs with a bomb because he has to, not because he's careless. Some of these weapons are live, some are almost. The flight deck is a crossword puzzle where every wrong letter is a spark. Harada rolls in his patrol pattern and hears snippets on the radio that don't line up. Where are our fighters? Someone snaps in a voice that doesn't usually snap. He doesn't know. None of them know that US torpedo planes are dying by the dozens at low altitude. What he doesn't see is that the sacrifice has dragged fighters down at the exact moment dive bombers arrive high and unseen. He only knows the ocean has a new sound, a scream that becomes thunder as US. SBDs drop from dots to knives. Kaga, Akagi, Soru. Within minutes, 3 carriers bloom fire from their decks. Fuel lines run under the planks because efficiency demanded it. Bombs cooking in the heat because orders changed fast. The Zero can do many things, but it cannot swat a bomb after it's released. From Harada's cockpit, the world below is suddenly wrong. Hoses writhe like snakes. Men run and have nowhere to run to. Black smoke writes letters no one can read. Japan loses 4 carriers at Midway. The U.S. loses 1, Yorktown. The numbers matter because of what comes after. Japan has the better pilots today, but they aren't water from a tap. Lose them, and the next men in line are fewer and less trained. Meanwhile, the U.S. is teaching men how to take off from decks that didn't exist a year ago. By the mid-1940s, the factories will match the training commands, roughly 80 to 90,000 aircraft each year. The Zero is still a masterpiece. It simply won't matter if you cannot replace the wrists that hold the stick. The deck crews below are brilliant. Their doctrine worked until it met a sequence of bad luck amplified by deck cycles and timing. They aren't fools. They're victims of a system that left no slack for chaos. That same efficiency which made them fast also makes them fragile when orders stutter. The same centralized control that turned a fleet into a conductor's baton turns deck space into a death trap when the music changes. A carrier strike cycle is a clock with multiple seconds hands ticking at once. Aircraft launch, climb, search, attack, and recover while the next wave is armed and spotted. The moment you change the target set, ships instead of island, or vice versa, you change the ordnance too. Swapping bombs for torpedoes takes time, muscle, and care under pressure. Live weapons coming off racks must be safed, ferried, and restowed. Fuel lines must be connected or disconnected under a deck that keeps shaking with landings. Every minute the deck is cluttered with fueled planes, and exposed ordnance is a minute where one mistake chains into catastrophe. On June 4, U.S. torpedo squadrons dragged defenders low, and dive bombers arrived into a sky with fewer interceptors and a deck loaded with fuses and fuel. Months later, Harada will remember the smell of hot rubber and fuel from that morning. We went from choosing to being chosen, he'll say to himself. He'll be shot down that autumn in the Solomons, and when he crawls out of his cockpit, he'll understand what the numbers have been saying all along. Midway's exchange, 4 carriers down for 1. By the time US production peaks, dozens of aircraft roll out in the time it takes to tell this part of the story. Escort carriers multiply behind the main body of the fleet. The sky's grammar has changed. The hunter feels the floor tilt. August 7th, 1942, above the Solomons, the sun hammers white on the water. Saburō Sakai spots a formation. SBD dauntless dive bombers with rear gunners. He angles for the first cut. In seconds, the world becomes tracers and will. Return fire rakes the cockpit. A blow finds his face. Something hot drills through the skull. One eye shuts down. Blood becomes a mask. The Zero is still flying, barely tamed, and Sakai talks to it like a friend about to bolt. He tapes his eyelid open with fabric and stubbornness. Every minute becomes a math problem. Fuel against distance, against the tremor in his hands. Consciousness comes and goes, passing out, waking again. The radio is a river of other people's emergencies. Down there, the sea is a page that could close over him without leaving a mark. He makes it anyway. Wheels down on a strip where the heat doesn't care if you're a hero. Corpsmen move like men who've seen everything. They make choices. Who gets morphine now? Who gets bandaged now? Who can wait? Harada's shot down that season. Through a world both familiar and new, the ground again, he crawls with ears, straining for the difference between a friend calling and an enemy moving. He moves. He lives. But the man who returns to the air isn't the same one who took off. He sees the empty chairs in the ready room and knows nobody is coming to fill all of them. Becoming an instructor comes next because the front is eating aces faster than the schools can replace them. Training throughput in American schools swells, tens of thousands of pilots flooding into squadrons by 1943, enough to keep formations full even when the Pacific takes several men each week. Over Guadalcanal, sorties stack up by the hundreds as days blur into each other. Japan's pipeline remains narrow. Wartime training shortens to push men to the front faster, but shorter training creates other costs that compound in combat. That's not moral failure. It's math, carved into shoulders and eyes and scar tissue. The enemy is still very good. American gunners are good too, and luck has stopped picking a side. Tomorrow, someone says in a tent that leaks light on a field, we'll fly again. No one needs to answer. A fighter unit's edge is a braid. Skill, trust, shared patterns woven tight. Lose your section leader, and a new pilot fills the seat. But the braid isn't the same thickness anymore. He doesn't yet know the wingman's habits at the merge, hasn't felt what the squadron leader does with throttle at the top of a loop. Maintenance crews learn shortcuts and quirks of airframes over time, change the tails faster than the crews can learn them, and you pay in mistakes. Fatigue is physics too. Stressed men see less, fix less, react slower, and fear compounds when yesterday's friend doesn't show up today. American units pay these costs, but the pipeline refills the braid. Japanese units pay and can't replace strands fast enough. Fewer hands on sticks know what to do at the moment when speed and angle make the difference between a burst that lands and a burst that draws a white line in empty air. Ahead lies a promise. If bravery is everything, then surely the world's largest battleship should be able to make a dent in this new world. It won't. And watching it fail will tell us why this war's gravity doesn't care about myths. On April 7, 1945, in the East China Sea, battleship Yamato moves through low horizon and greasy chop like a floating city. For Ensign Mitsuru Yoshida, the ship is a neighborhood he knows by smell and sound, the tang of paint in a passageway, the metallic ring of a stair tread that orients him 2 decks above the mess. The sortie order carries weight. Everyone believes this will be the day. Then the first wave arrives, dots that resolve into wings. Bomb hits slam the deck, torpedoes punch holes below the waterline. The list begins, not a tilt you can shrug off, but a pressure in your inner ear that whispers the word inevitable. Men walk like they're climbing a hill that isn't there. Damage control parties move through compartments, sealing them where the math is brutal. Save the many by drowning the few. Tools slide across what used to be a floor and is now a wall. Someone else takes a breath, tasting hot oil and steel, doesn't cough because he needs to count the next station. Strike groups peel away and return. Another wave arrives. Anti-aircraft guns draw white ropes in the sky, cutting some planes down, missing many more. Torpedoes on one side force engineers to counter-flood compartments on the other, a desperate math to keep the ship upright, but every counterflood is a concession. You trade buoyancy to fight a rolling moment that keeps accumulating debt with each new hit. The center of gravity migrates. The sound of a magazine explosion isn't quite sound at all. Men holding positions scatter. What was a list becomes a roll, becomes a capsize. The ship lifts its propellers into the air like a knockdown boxer showing the bottoms of his shoes. Yoshida finds daylight in places where no daylight belongs and swims through a world of oil that wants to own his lungs. Over 3,000 men dead. Only a few hundred alive. Survivors in the water watch a shape they thought could argue with fate sink like an ordinary thing. The most famous ship of the era dies in hours under aircraft launched from decks manufacturers stamped out like timepieces. The Yamato sank because once torpedo hits cluster on one side, a ship can only fight back so much. Torpedoes blow holes low on the hull, flooding compartments and killing reserve buoyancy. Damage control floods the opposite side deliberately, but water is heavy. Each ton added steel's lift. As the list increases, guns can't point anymore, pumps lose their grip, valves end up in places hands can't reach. Vent trunks that carried air become chimneys, carrying smoke into working spaces. Past certain angles, ladders become walls, and doors become hatches you cannot reach. The sky keeps making more hits. Physics doesn't care if that ball is the largest battleship in the world. Men stand in compartments watching the floor become a wall, listening to a ship die by rules that have nothing to do with courage. A young pilot named Kiyoshi Ogawa will dive his plane at the carrier Bunker Hill, and nearly 400 men on that ship will die in a heartbeat. May 11th, 1945, off Kyushu. The carrier Bunker Hill moves with the wind like a city block at sea. Launch, recover, arm, refuel, launch again. Heat shimmers above the flight deck. Men in coloured shirts move with practiced efficiency. The rhythm holds. 2 aircraft come in low, straight, deliberate. The first finds the deck with a bomb. The second, flown by Ensign Kiyoshi Ogawa, finds the island. 2 strikes in roughly 30 seconds. Aviation gasoline meets sparks, a ready room becomes flame, ordnance cooks off. Pieces of a plane and pieces of a man land where men were just standing. A surviving sailor remembers it later. The flight deck looked like a foundry. We kept the wind across the bow and we fought. That is the job at sea. Foam arcs from hoses. Men disappear into smoke and reappear, dragging someone who has stopped moving. Someone writes the number, nearly 400 killed. Bunker Hill lives. The task force lives. Behind them are more carriers and more planes and more trained crews. 1 ship mauled. The line unbroken. Kamikaze tactics can smash a deck and ground a carrier for weeks, but they cannot cancel the pipeline that delivers another deck and another air group on schedule. When a plane dives into a carrier at full speed with a bomb aboard, the energy concentrates on one place, the flight deck, and the compartments below it. Fire spreads fast where fuel lines coil and oxygen pools in corners. Secondary explosions follow as ordnance heats. Carriers are built with subdivision and firefighting in mind, some with armoured hangar decks, and all with redundant pumps and damage control teams drilled to act without asking. The U.S. Navy in 1945 is a system where spare parts ride other decks, replacement air groups train ashore, and a shattered ship allows the larger organism to continue moving. Ogawa flies his last 30 seconds with skill and resolve. The bitterness belongs to institutions that thought courage would outrun a factory schedule. Nearly 400 killed on Bunker Hill, the single deadliest kamikaze strike on a U.S. ship. Dozens of carriers afloat, hundreds of carrier-borne aircraft turning every ocean square into a place where the sky arrives on time. Men who believed at the beginning speak now. A pilot who became a teacher and then an old man. A young officer who swam through oil. A prisoner who began on a beach and ended at a museum. When the war ends, the people in it do not. Kaname Harada grows old in a country knitting itself back together, and he opens a small daycare. He talks to schoolchildren about aeroplanes and what they can do to a man. War taught me to love peace, he says into microphones. He is the same person who once walked to a plane like a man checks a horse's bridle before a fast ride, and he is not the same person at all. The empty chairs stay with him. So does the day courage turned into cargo. He does not blame courage itself, he blames the idea that courage could replace 1,000 hands building 1,000 things every single day. That's what the factories taught him. That's what he tells the children. Mitsuru Yoshida's pages sit in a bookstore, and a young reader opens Time's Requiem for Battleship Yamato Times and meets sentences that are neither angry nor kind. The ship was a question, he writes, and every survivor in the water becomes a kind of answer. Names appear on the page with room for breath between them. The book teaches one more class about how a myth ends when it meets a pattern it cannot break. In 1991, Kazuo Sakamaki stands in front of HA 19 inches, a museum hall with clean floors and soft light. The hull that once felt like a destiny now looks small enough to be a prop in a play. His hand touches it gently, like you touch an old dog, and he says very little. This story began with a weapon in black water. Now it ends with a memory that has been painted and placarded and explained to visitors. I am cold, the first words he spoke under guard, Those words echo like a bell struck and left to hum. The room is not cold. He has brought the weather with him. 4 Japanese carriers lost at Midway for every 1 American carrier. In 1944 alone, American factories built nearly 100,000 aircraft, nearly double the previous year's production. Over 100 escort carriers took to the seas, enough to make the world feel smaller for anyone sailing under a flag the factories didn't build. Yamato went down with 3,000 sailors aboard, leaving just over 200 survivors, marking one day that closed out a century of faith in steel walls. 396 men died on Bunker Hill when 2 sailors chose the bravest action they could take. The carrier survived. The war moved on. Bravery matters. It always will. It wins dogfights, holds lines, pulls a friend from fire. Courage changes days. Systems change wars. Factories, teachers, welders, planners, logistics officers with binders full of dull miracles. These people decide who runs out of planes first. That is how the world works when you stretch a fight into years. Sand under a face, a rifle above a spine, a training manual that cannot anticipate a coral head, a corporal who chooses a blanket before a question. The war grew from such moments into numbers so large they break your mouth if you try to say them fast. The men inside the war grew too. Some decided never to teach a boy to worship a machine again. Others wrote it down. Still, others came back to touch an old hull, set down a memory, and go on with their lives. The story began with a secret weapon crossing dark water. It ends with an empty sea and the factories running and the voices of men who remember.